Hello everybody, my name is Tobias, and I chose Left 4 Dead 2 as the game that I'll be modding. For those of you who might not know what this game is about, it is a cooperative first-person survival horror shooter where you and up to 3 of your friends fight off massive hordes of the undead through fast-paced action and teamwork while traversing throughout the campaigns. Each with their own unique themes, challenges, and stories. The main goal is very simple, you just have to reach the safe house and not get your teeth kicked in order to move on to the next level. This game, in my opinion, is incredibly fun, and one of the reasons for why I chose it is because of the massive modding community back behind the game. Every single asset in this game can be modified, ranging from the characters all the way down to the littlest interactable items the game has to offer. You have the ability to completely overhaul this game and turn it into something cursed like this, for example. I personally have never made the attempt at creating a mod before in any game. The most experience I've ever had is going to the Steam Workshop page and hitting that big green download button and calling it a day. The first thing I did was look up how to make mods in Left 4 Dead 2 and was presented with about roughly half a dozen software tools that I've never even heard of before except for Blender. I won't lie, it was overwhelming and I immediately began to question what I had gotten myself into. I cracked open Blender for the very first time in my life, and that was my first mistake. I ended up watching several parts of the donut tutorial on YouTube to make sense of what I was looking at. After learning how to move, I went to the web and found a free 3D model for testing purposes to make sure this whole process would even work. I chose an Elite from Halo, and honestly looking back at this was a mistake I made. I should have chosen a human figure from the start with this process. I was, however, lucky enough to have found several tutorials on how to make sense of all of these applications and how they all tie together. So, to get the model into the game, I had to make a folder that matches one of the character's codenames like this. Within that folder, it needed 2 paths, one path for the textures and the other for the model's files. Next, I navigated through many folders until I found this file specifically. Double-clicking it boots up GCFscape, which is where you can locate and grab files for models you want to modify. After dragging the files into the model branch of the folder I created earlier, I opened Crowbar, dragged the MDL file in there, decompiled it, and got an SMD files in return. Next, I booted up Blender and imported the SMD and Elite files into Blender. I lined them up together, restructured Coach's armature to fit the mold of the Elite, which ended up making this horrific creature. I pushed some buttons to create a new resting pose, renamed the files to match the original SMD files, and exported them back into the decompiled folder. I went into that folder, right-clicked the GC file, and added this line of code in there for the textures. I saved it, compiled the file, got 4 new Coach files, and replaced the old ones from earlier. After doing all that, I opened up the VTF app and converted the Elite's textures and threw them into the material folder. I bundled up the folder, dragged it into the VPK file, received this icon, and then I dragged it into the add-ons folder within Left 4 Dead 2. I booted up the game and got this as my result. It took me a day to figure out this process. He sadly doesn't do much besides slide around the map, but I was happy to get the model in there. I decided to go back and redo the entire process, and that's when I learned about weight painting and transferring those weights over to the custom model from the Left 4 Dead model's armature, which gave me this result. He finally moves around, but now it's more horrific looking than ever before. Now that I was beginning to understand on how to get a model into the game, I decided to work with a human model this time. I found a Space Marine and started the whole process again on a different character. This is where I finally learned how to apply textures. I had to make sure the name of these files aligned with what you see in the shader and texture tabs on Blender. Then I had to convert those textures into VTF and VTM files, go into the VTM file itself, and change this line of code to this instead. This way, Valve can read and apply the textures into the game. That took me several days to figure out, and I had to find a 16-year-old video to tell me that information, and it gave me this result. For the most part, this one turned out pretty well. The only issue it has is around the shoulder plates. The character will sometimes lift their arms, and it stretches out looking like putty, but I was thrilled to have textures finally applied to someone. I went back to the Elite, applied the textures, and somehow this model just kept becoming more of an abomination by the minute, so I left that alone. So, I tried making my own model instead. Since I have no experience with Blender, I tried to go for something simple. I wanted to make a battle cat because I thought it would fit into making this game look more cursed. My first attempt was this, and it was too small for the character model, so I went for the tank cat instead. My second attempt looked a lot better in my opinion. Not sure why these rings around the body kept forming, but I left those alone. Unfortunately, I kept coming across these cowardly errors that weren't letting me export the GC file, so I wasn't able to get the model into the game. I thought it was because of how I built the model, so I tried for something even simpler, and just made a head around the model. I got the files and model into the game, but the head was missing and it made the character have a goofy walk. It was also just outright broken. At some points, getting close to the model, it would look normal, and the further out, the more mangled and deformed it became. I tried about half a dozen times attempting to fix this error, but I couldn't figure it out, so I gave up. It honestly ended up working out anyways because it fits in with all the other creatures around it. Anyways, that's what I was able to accomplish during this process. I learned a lot along the way with modding Left 4 Dead outside of its engine. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to watch this video, and I hope you have a wonderful day.